Welcome to Artist Trauma. This week we did Death in Midsummer by Yukio Mishimi, which was really great. I really enjoyed this story. I nearly cried. Nearly cried. So it was
Yeah,
great. It was
it's
great.
his
Thanks,
it's
thanks,
his flow.
thanks for
It's his a simple life, right? Like it's kind of a simple life, a simple heart. Sorry, not a simple life. Jesus Christ.
Oh
It's
yeah, yeah, Simple Heart.
you
Yeah.
know, it kind of has this flow of to talk about this piece is to talk about the duration of literature. Time moves in this story in the mode of grief, right? Like it's not like oh, summer's passed. Oh, now summer's returned. Summer is important because it's the length of trauma. It's a great story. It also like sometimes Mishima is a classic 20th century Japanese writer, regarded as one of the
By
best.
the way, just to be clear, everybody, like this was like a 30-page story out of this collection of stories. Okay.
Oh yeah, and we
Just,
have plenty to talk about for an hour.
yeah,
This
you
is
know.
this is like
All
it's
right. So,
very
so,
dense.
so, so what about Mishimi or
So
Mishima?
Mishima. Mishima is a classic kind of I don't know if it's second or third wave Japanese writers. So the first wave you have like Akutagawa and some of these other greats who are just phenomenal. And then the second wave would be like Mishima and then like the Tanizaki. Yeah, Datsai. Yeah, like more just straight ahead modernist writers. Except Mishima doesn't really fit into any of that because he is just a solid fucking romantic. Like piercing psychological insights. Mishima is also regarded as a really strange writer for a lot of reasons. Infinitely stranger is the fact that he was a devout fascist and killed himself in the 70s trying to reinstate the emperor through ritual seppuku. So, okay, there's that.
That's you know, it it it's
He's
it's
also
it's
gay and a
remarkable.
fitness enthusiast. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable how many of these great Japanese writers killed themselves. Like Akutagawa, like poisoned himself next to his wife, and Datsai, had like a suicide pact with a woman, and this one, this one wins in terms of just sheer oddity of
he's an
suicide.
odd man. He had very, very strong beliefs about Japanese culture. And that's where he was a fascist. And it also is where he produces great work. There's nothing problematic in this work. There's in some others ones that's really distinctly fascist. This is just like human. I don't really there's no politics in
It's
this.
it's decidedly
Yeah,
decidedly human.
yeah, it's a
So
very humanist take. And then the one last thing about Mishima is so he wrote these sort of realism, psychologically piercing realism stories, which also are very intense, I think, in their descriptive power psychologically. And he also did really weird shit that's not to me as good. He has this book Life for Sale that has a vampire in it. Um, he's not a good experimental writer, in my opinion. This is just a humble opinion. So I read Life for Sale. He also has a sci-fi book. So he wasn't super backward, but when he left his just basic psychological realism, I felt it's just like totally distracted. Um, whereas other writers exist in fairy tale and postmodern stuff very easily in Japan, I find Mishima is very forced.
yeah, yeah,
Very complicated.
I always find it weird when a psychological naturalistic kind of writer decides to do something science fiction-esque, like, and I just or horror-esque, like Maupassant has his story about the Horla, and
Yeah.
I I can't remember another one. I know there's a good number of these, but I just always feel disappointed. Oh, I mean, the biggest one is Aldous Huxley, but that's more a personal thing. Like he makes these
No, no, that's not a
wonderful
personal
novels,
thing.
and then Brave New World and whatever else afterwards. I just find like,
Island.
stop, please stop.
No,
Uh,
no, no, no. That's actually I would put that as part of the category. I second that. I know I haven't read his psychological realism, but having read some of his later stuff and just kind of, you know,
yeah,
it's fine, but it's bad. It's not. It would be fine if the fact that he wasn't have this previous life. So
yeah, yeah. It's anyway. Okay, so let's get to Mishima.
Well, this is my choice. I And the reason I chose it is because I was trying to think of what I thought perfect literature is. And in Japan, like obviously I like reading a lot of Japanese literature, and I just thought after I read this story 3 times, I could read it 5 more times. I just kind of go, yeah, like everything's in the right place. It's the gold standard. So I wanted to do this one because I really thought this one was great.
Yeah, that is. I only read it once, but I second that description. And by the way, just so everybody knows, it's about basically, a family goes down to a vacation at a beach. The children are unattended for a moment by the maiden aunt. The maiden aunt has a heart attack suddenly. The two children die, and then basically the mother, father, and surviving 5-year-old child have to deal with this. Have to deal with this. And
And he
basically it's a
holds
story
no
about overcoming
punches.
grief.
Yeah, and he holds no punches. There's guilt about not feeling grief. There's sudden guilt later. There's literally every experience of death under the sun in like 30 pages.
Yeah, and when you say it's perfect, I want there's a very particular quality it has, which I it's hard for me to put into words, but there's just little details that I don't fully understand why they appeal to me. I don't know why they should be there, but with my whole soul, I feel they should be there. Like one thing about like the father,
Hmm.
it's just there's just like little just things about him. Oh yeah, he's a sympathetic character. He is like he's trying to handle this. He's an honest caretaker for his family. Seems somewhat emotionally open, and then you hear little things about like yeah, he's doing well in his career, and he had and through certain secret means he was had an extra supply of support for the family from the company. Presuming some kind of fraud he's committing, some sort of embezzlement, which is just like okay, that gives me a flavor of him. It's not like big scale embezzlement, but it's something.
I think
Um,
I feel like he had to put that in there to make the father figure have a little bit more something going on. Like every
yeah,
character has, all of us have these really complex lives, and Mishima acknowledges that we all have secrets. And I think some good writers, but that aren't great writers, don't include our secrets in the writing. And Mishima includes our secrets, but he kind of keeps them secret. Like he says they're there.
yeah. Actually, that's the right way because it's also mentioned very briefly that like yeah, like he was feeling distant from his wife for a while, and so he had like a brief and very minor affair. But as soon as he learned his wife was pregnant, he then proceeded to return to her like a child to his mother.
That's
And
literally what it says in there. It's like a
yeah,
child back to his mother, which
yeah,
is a beautiful little.
yeah. I mean, it's such a just brilliant line. But like both of those, I think I now am starting to understand why I like those lines so much. Is that they just feel like, oh, here's this whole other world and inner life to this character who we're only seeing one aspect of,
Mhm.
and it's implied, it's giving something about him, but it's like no, yeah, but that's just sort of a dark secretive area of his life. We're not going to spend time on that. That's not why we're here today, children. um so I find that those in particular, but also just like a lot of just I don't know scenery, um, just stuff.
Yeah,
It
I mean,
reminds me of Chekhov. Like that's the writer this reminds me of the most is Chekhov.
because there's a metaphysical, maybe not the right word, nature response, right? Like the sea is alive. The sea and the oceans and the seasons are kind of responding to their grief, not in an animistic way, but like in their perception of it. Like, oh, like there's normal symbolism, but there's also this deeper meaning to some of them. Can we find some examples of what I'm talking about?
Well,
Sorry.
I mean, like the biggest one
Seasons are
is
responding.
at the very end of the story, when it's like
Oh
it's
yeah.
describing it's a long description of what the clouds and the waves are like, and just it's like this heavy, burdensome clouds, and then there's like these blue ones off in the distance that they're like they left behind by a broom, and there's this whole tumultuous play of light and darkness. And it's just like it's the perfect vision of what it'd be like to return to the beach where like half of your family died, um, and
Yeah.
you sort of moved on, and it's kind of triumphant, but it's also extremely vulnerable.
In the vulnerability, like in like her response to the scenery, she says, or he writes, since the tragedy, Tomoko's face had often worn that expression, as if she had forgotten herself, as if she were waiting for something.
Yeah,
It's like deeply evocative.
yeah, that okay, that particular line of as if she were waiting for something, that is just brilliant on some level. I really can't express. It's just like it gives you like just like that kind of emotional tumult and that sort of intensity and the way you're just looking out and it's like you're waiting, but that's all you're doing. You're not waiting
Yeah, and
for
if
anything.
we give it any qualities, it feels wrong, right? Like waiting for a sudden return of the dead children. Nope, obviously no.
No.
Waiting for the new child to fully take the place of the old. Absolutely not. That's stupid. But they all kind of haunt it, but any one of them is wrong.
Yeah.
And there's something kind of mysterious. It's like this is great writing like an electron, right? Where it's like a lot of these things are dancing around, but you can't if you try and pinpoint it and say, "Oh, it specifically means this," it loses its magic.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about periods of like emotional tumult you can have. And all sorts of things actually. It's like when you're just like processing and it's just like you're just staring in front of you, waiting. And
Yeah.
there's nothing you're waiting for. You're just going through the emotion. Like there's this one beautiful line from Uncle Vanya, the Chekhov play, where uh, one character has done something somewhat profoundly embarrassing and shameful. And he
Hmm.
says to another one, like, God, I don't know what I'm going to do. The shame. I can't live with it. I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And then the other character goes, you're going to do nothing.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is, I think, my favorite back and forth in all of literature. Um,
When we say so, there's often like you can teach art, you can teach any art, it's fine. People, if you're excited, you can go and learn whatever. But there are certain moments in literature where it's like, yeah, you can't teach that. Like those some of the moments in the Mishima and some of the moments in a lot of what we've been reading, it's like that sort of just has to, because even if you ask the writer, they're not going to be exactly sure why it works so well.
well,
They'll just like
yeah,
it's perfect.
it's the sort of thing where I have an interesting relationship with thinking about great writers. It's and well, actually, when you say great, any thinker like scientists or engineers or whatever,
Yeah.
it's all the same kind of thing when you get right down to it. It's this like ability to like just be open to things and to just like listen to yourself and to restate things and just hear reality. Like I remember when I was getting my doing my thesis and trying to like come up with like solutions to this problem I was working on. It's like it's part of it's like you're trying to listen to these inchoate, inarticulate images that are crossing your mind. And I feel the same way about just like a fiction writer is like there's something really special about this moment. There's some quality here. How do I put it on paper? How do I make it real? What is it? I feel like there's a more kind of like freedom when you're working with fiction. Like it feels like you'll kind of get there a bit more, but I think it's basically similar in some way.
I think, I mean, the stereotypical answer is that there's less freedom the shorter you are. Like the there's a little more wiggle room in a 300-page novel. Not every word has to be in the exact right place because you need a little bit of breathing room at certain moments. I think that's generally false. I think that's more of an illusion than in reality. You know, you read when I have trouble with Balzac and he's being long-winded, it's just bad. It's not like it's
Yeah,
not like wiggle room, but I think there is the appearance of wiggle room that can aid. Like, oh, we're having some breathing room here, and then we're gonna get hit with it. Um, I partly chose this story because I felt like there was zero wiggle room. I just,
yeah,
you know,
just
it's
these
just like flows.
perfect little details, and they're all there. And yeah, there's nothing. Well, okay, one thing that is a little bit. I just want to note this fact because just for the sake of honesty. I did notice at the end of the story that it was translated and abridged by Edward G. Seidensticker. And it's like,
Have you been able to find any information about this though? I haven't been able to find out if it's actually abridged that much. I
yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
It
Uh,
does bother me to no end though.
yeah, maybe one day find some
It's
other.
also it's not that long, guys.
Yeah,
It's not a lot. It's like a 200 page. Like you could have made it the. Why is it abridged?
yeah, I don't understand what is. I mean, maybe it happened to me actually yesterday. I was talking about a Datsai novel, No Longer Human, with someone who knew Japanese.
No.
And she was explaining that this one section of the book, there's a lot of wordplay, and you can see there's wordplay in it, like when you're reading it in English. But
Mm-hmm.
it's but like she was telling me things about like okay, I got a little bit of what was going on, a little bit of what he was intending, but like the way it's like oh that's like the Tao Te Ching, and this is very similar, like this sort of like very superficial poetic way of doing is like that's how a pseudo intellectual would do it, and like all of that just sort of completely passed by.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe what was cut out here was just the parts that can't literally cannot be translated. Um, I don't know.
It's kind of interesting. Like, so it's interesting how well, I mean, at least I think, I don't have any basis of comparison, the psychological insights translate from different parts of the world. Those usually are like pretty good. You know, like there wasn't any experience in this that I was like, oh, those Japanese people. You know, there wasn't like a moment where I was like, oh yeah, they do it differently. You know, I mean, they
Yeah,
have a lot of
there's no
grieving
moment where the character is walking by a cafe and he sees a mother and son talking to each other excitedly, and it's clear she's getting a certain sexual pleasure from his flirtatious tone with her.
Nope.
This was a moment in Akutagawa's story, Spinning Gears,
Oh
and
yeah.
that's like such a weird, fucked up moment that I am just like, is this like okay? You would never make this as a casual comment in an American story. Like it's so bizarre and inhuman, it doesn't make sense. Is this something more common in Japan? I like tried to research it, but it was like there were no good sources about this. So I
Yeah,
am
that's
just
pretty
fuddled,
strange.
fuddled. So like sometimes that does happen in like another country where it's like, you guys do things that way? Like
Well,
this
I
is
mean,
or no,
yeah.
incest is not a thing in Japan or whatever. Like, is there some like weird way in which it's like, oh, instead of like one in a million over in America, it's like one in 100,000 over there? I don't know. I really don't know. It was just such a weird detail to casually mention. It fit in the story, but it was so weird.
I mean, I think the idea. Okay, there's a long-winded answer and a short answer, and I'm gonna go with a tiny short answer, which is I don't think that every culture has the same view of the incest taboo. I mean, Freud at the beginning made it like the thing that everyone avoids, bar none, more than death, right?
Unless you're Egyptian, and then you like it's law that the
You
queen,
go for that shit, right? Yeah. So like I think
the
that like
princess will be married.
yeah, and I think in a certain level Freud's right. Like yeah, like I can see how the incest taboo is sort of a basic starting point, but I can also see how other cultures wouldn't have it be their starting point, and also how deeply uncomfortable that makes me. That I like really don't like that.
Yeah,
Like
it's
I
a
don't like that at all.
viscerally repulsive thing. It feels primal.
I think it I mean, I don't know if it is, but it probably is. But
I don't know.
well, yeah, is that like a cultural thing? But in any sense, I mean, my answer would be yes, right? As a 21st century man, the answer is never just biology or culture. It's always a mix of the two. But I
Yeah.
think one of the areas that never translates, and I'm assuming it didn't in this story, but it wasn't relevant. It wasn't relevant. I don't think. I mean, it might have been with the father. Is I think one of the hardest things to capture is code switching. So like,
Hmm.
like the most prominent example is African American people code switch based on who they're talking to in or out culture wise.
Yeah.
White people code switch. I mean, we all code switch all the time. But like if you're just hanging out on the beach, I might be like, "What the fuck's going on? Hey man, what's up?" And then if you're teaching a class, that would be like deeply strange. We're switching all the time, and I think that's something that is pretty difficult to get onto the language of. If you have to know the language to know the code switching. There might have been an example in here where it was conveyed, though, now that I'm thinking about it, when the father is in the taxi.
Mhm.
Like the father's always switching how he's talking. And then I think it was described also when the father first arrives to see his wife,
Yeah, he didn't
how he handles it, right? Because he kind of has to think about it.
as in he wants to put his hand on his wife's shoulder to comfort her.
Yeah.
And but he can't do that in front of the hotel owner. That would be like having revealed the most intimate secrets of the bedroom. That's how it's put.
Which definitely adds a little bit of evidence to Yukio Mishima is one of the great 19th century writers. Like
Yeah,
when I read him,
I
it's like
was
weird there's cars sometimes.
yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier that he's like Chekhov, and that there's
Very
all of these really crisp, living details and this genuine tenderness for human beings, in this rather sort of sad, dreary way. Chekhov is somewhat more tragic about it. Like the story ends fairly happily. Um, he's hopeful with hopefulness, with
Well,
hopefulness.
I think I think sometimes in Chekhov, grief is part of the form, but in this story, the form is grief. So you have to move like the form of this story mirrors getting over the event and going through the whole thing. And so I think if it ended in a suicide, it would be more 19th century. I'll say it that way. I think the fact that there's like a sense of moving on gives it a less firm endpoint, maybe? I don't know. Help me out here. What do you think?
Yeah. Let's see. It has a okay. One thing that just needs to be said also is like someone like Chekhov, like he has a very definite form. It has the appearance of formlessness, but it's like no, there's a very clear like beginning, middle, and end to his stories. Is that traditional way they're done. Yeah, on
Right.
this one, like, what is there is a certain sense. The question, okay, what makes something more 20th century versus 19th century is it irresolution or resolution? With Chekhov, there is this pronounced irresolution in a number of his stories, a number of his best stories, where it's like, yeah, like I do not know how things are going to work out for this couple here. Like it's so fucking difficult and painful. This next part of their life, they're going to end. End of story. End of tale. Um, this one's like, no, it feels pretty like the family has survived. Like the very last image, the very last words are just the father. he clutched tighter at Katsuo's hand. Like
Mhm.
that's like they're having this very difficult emotional moment, all of them, but like it's familiar, it's touching, it's a very it's like we're being brought closer together ultimately. The family
Ultimately,
need it.
the weird for us when we read a lot of negative endings because they're just more common in a sense of tragic sense.
Yeah.
It's interesting to have one end hopeful. I mean, it is hopeful, and there's a structural, lovely little hopeful thing in here because he's aware of her expression's meaning, which is kind of cool. So he writes, Masaru had seen that face before. Since the tragedy, Tomoko's face had worn that expression, waiting for something. And the next line is him saying, "What are you waiting for?" So I love that because he gets closer to. I think.
Well, he
I think.
wants to say it, but he doesn't say it, and I
Oh, he
think that
wanted to ask lightly. Yeah, even better, right? Even
yeah,
more so.
yeah, which you might think is like, oh, well, that's like emotionally distant and they're apart, which, it is. Like, it would be nice, sort of, if he had said that, tried to like make it clearer. But in that context, it makes sense not for him to say that. This is a really emotionally difficult event. And I actually, now thinking about it, it just occurs to me, I love the fact that he ends it in this particular moment.
Yeah.
It's not like the family like happy and joyous and like nothing had ever happened,
Hmm.
because then it would feel like nothing had ever happened. It's ending on a moment of, yeah, we're going back and we're reliving the grief, and it's hard for me to express what it is, and I have difficulty communicating. All I can do is just grab my son's hand.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
And
I think
it's really incredibly sincere and beautiful, and
it's actually, can I tell you a secret? This is not a secret. That's a weird way to phrase this. I haven't finished this collection
yeah, that's
because
fine.
it's so emotional. Every story, you're just like, Jesus Christ, Mishima. Like, do you have any like calm stories? So like I've read a lot of Mishima at this point, and I keep having to take breaks because I'm like, wow, that was emotional. In a good way. Like he's really one of the great emotion guys.
No, I mean, I'm very happy to hear that. I'm really happy to hear that this isn't just like some one-off tale.
No, this is actually another reason I wanted to do this one is because if you Google it and look for it, like a couple people in the know talk about it as an absolute masterpiece, but it's not very popular. Like his popular ones are like The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, his tetralogy, and a couple others. And then they're all kind of flawed. Like he's one of those great 20th century writers, but every one of them I've read from him, there's something where I was like, oh, that's a little much, or oh, that's a little over there. And this is the one I was like, actually, I think it's his best, one of his best works. But my absolute favorite is still The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea, which I have really terrible news, does also have incest. And I'm so sorry. I don't know why
I
it's,
don't have
it's like a thing.
look, I don't have like a phobia of it. I'm not even particularly repelled by it in the compared to other things.
It's just weird, right?
Yeah, it's
I mean, we
just
can just
something
accept
like
it on a basic level that it's kind of
I'm
weird.
sorry. I don't know if it means to me what this means to you, buddy. Um,
In the story, it definitely has a symbolic quality that makes it slightly less gross, but in the book, you're still like, oh, this is pretty gross.
yeah,
But
let's set that aside and just
read
stick.
it at some point.
Yeah.
So I think, or a point I wanted to return to is I think that the formal construction of this work mirrors the structure of the grieving process. That's like my thesis.
Hmm. Yeah.
So at the end, we're talking about it, the denouement as sort of being some type of acceptance stage. I don't like the stages of grief because they're going to make it sound really cookie cutter, but a little bit of acceptance at the end.
Yeah. No, I mean it is. It's like it's.
And there
it's
also is that sort of just rejection of the event. Like the dad is just like at certain points, like, I can't process that. So I'm just gonna imagine that's not happening.
yeah, I mean, like I mean, the first, I mean, there is something true about that whole like five stages, the acceptance of death, of denial, anger,
And I
bar,
think we could map it onto the story if we like really wanted to. It's
yeah.
probably
I mean, the thing is like, and I imagine even like whoever originally wrote that probably did not think of it as like being this rigid formula. It's more just
yeah.
like, yeah, this is just generally the kinds of things you find, and they, kind of goes by this sort of stages.
And I was reading that it's very fluid. You move between them and you can move back. It's
Yeah,
not like
yeah.
yeah.
So like we shouldn't caricature that guy. And
Fair enough.
it's good you noted like there's these five big things going on with your, but yeah, but denial. I mean, that's very much just what both of the parents are experiencing at first. Like, okay,
Can I read the
like
dad?
the
Here's the
death of
dad.
first off, like the the first person who's discovered dead is the maiden aunt, the
Yeah.
sister-in-law of the wife, um, who's just had a heart attack. And it's only realized later that like only one of the children is around and the other two children are missing. And well, we already know that they like were lost and drowned out there, but it's like she doesn't realize it because you don't realize it sometimes. It's like you just have these very simple thoughts in the moment and you don't question what's happening around you.
Hmm.
Which is a really great, like just that. I don't think I've ever had that situation of like the sort of like mass hypnotic state that can happen, but like I can believe that. I can believe that 100%. Um, but there is a sense for her of like I really don't want the day to happen. Everyone's searching for the kids, and when daylight happens, then this tragedy becomes real. Then
Yeah.
it's certain that they're dead, and I
Hmm.
don't want that. And the same thing with the father of his first reaction to like the telegram from his wife that it's like where it says your sister died, two of the children are lost, is like his reaction is like he had been like suddenly dismissed from his job for no reason. Uh,
Yeah.
and
And then also a mild annoyance,
yeah, and there was,
which is great.
and he's not in contact with the feelings, but there's also like a bargaining actually that goes on when he's on the train of like, oh, like I don't really. It's like oh, maybe she was like maybe there's a chance that the children are actually alive, that they're not like that she just lost track of them and they're just lost somewhere.
There's also this that's kind of like that. The world around him was quite as it had always been. Nothing had happened. And if he tried, he could believe that nothing had happened, even to him. A childish annoyance came over him. In an unknown place, an incident with which he had had nothing to do had cut him off from the world.
Yes.
Like that kind of back and forth, ending back with being isolated in your grief. Or it's not even grief at that point. It's almost worse. It's like
Yeah,
this indecision thing. He really has a horrible time, because you get this telegram and it's like, fuck. And and then it's just this horrible, agonizing period of time before he arrives.
yeah, and it's just like that part of it also, just like the weird impersonality that grief has in a certain way, like how it does that to you. Uh, One place it comes out very clearly is when they're just talking. I think they're attending the future gravesite of the children and everybody, and the thought of it's absurd that three people died. As in,
Yeah.
one you can take for granted and you can understand, like, that's the sort of misfortune that occurs in life. 10,000 people dying in a tragedy is also something that we can understand and appreciate as an event in life.
Yeah.
Three is excessive, though, but not excessive enough. Like, it's such a unintelligible quantity of tragedy. And it's absurd. It's absurd, and you can't process like just how stupid and irrelevant existence is in this particular dimension.
And Yeah, I like that. And I also I think I don't know if this is still true today, but like I think the denial is kind of the way people deny is kind of gendered. It's funny, this is in Japan, so it's different gender norms. But there is sort of like a feminine guilt that can happen, and then the masculine kind of like, I just got to get on with shit. And they kind of do that, and I was like, oh, that really strikes me as American. Like that's kind of similar to how American culture would have been in the 50s and a lot
Yeah,
of culture.
like as in the stereotype, and I think there's probably a big straight line of truth to this is um, the man is attempting to be callously indifferent while the woman is neurotically self-involved, and both things are a form of non-engagement on a certain level. um,
Yeah, it's like I think in certain societies, this one would have been included. The man has to get over shit is two problems, right? Because the man has to get to work, and the woman has to be at home, and so
yeah,
it produces
and
those different, it furders those different responses,
I mean,
right?
well, one thing is that it's not so much he's escaping into work. It's more just like, well, it's nice that he has his work. He has something to take his mind off, and it's unfortunate she doesn't. But then she kind of does later. Like she, gets this whole fit of like, I'm going to start sewing. I'm cleaning the house constantly. Like I'm doing all of this kind of work to take my mind off what's happening. So, in a sense, she does also fall into that kind of um, keeping busy and tidying up and everything. As in, and it was sort of like she had uh, she had stolen away all of the work of the middle-aged housekeeper. It's like it's
Yeah,
like
yeah. To keep busy, to not, yeah. And then another one that was great is like she keeps having the pangs of guilt when she doesn't think about her children.
yeah, that
That
that's
one struck me as like, oh, I've heard of that. That's
yeah
like
I
one of these things that's like, oh, that's how people like really talk about
Yeah, that's happened a lot. I've seen it a lot in stories of like
it.
that kind of issue of feeling. Yeah, it's actually it's in an Ibsen, Lady from the Sea, where that moment happens, and I think I think it Aldous Huxley actually has that too in one of his novels to bring him up again. So like that's a it's a great detail to always bring up, but it's something other people have observed. One thing I also want to mention about the whole story is it reminds me a lot of Tolstoy of Death of Ivan Ilyich, because
Mhm.
that's a story again just dealing with uh, in this case the personal death of realizing you are going to die, and just all of but the particular quality that the story reminds me of is just all of the psychological nuance in that. All of
Yeah.
the little subtle things that go on in your mind and contradictions and uh, like you're judging yourself for like not feeling worse. Um, Mishima is more concerned with the actual direct emotion and less with like social etiquette. Tolstoy is much more concerned about that and how it plays.
I think that so there's clearly social pressure in terms of the grieving period. That's where like the symbolic shit exists in this Japanese culture. Like they have like a very specific, it seems like longer thing, which I'm fine with just like saying, yeah, they do this specific thing. Whatever. It lasts a certain amount of time and you have to go through certain iterations. Every culture has something like that. But other than that, I think I think the culture seems, especially for the bourgeoisie at this time, a little free. I mean, it doesn't seem super rigid in the social roles of grief. More, they seem worried about how they're going to be portrayed or seen instead of how they're supposed to be seen. There is a little bit of that at the beginning, but I actually think that just is because he's so piercingly psychological
Mhm.
that actually it doesn't seem like such a rigid
Yeah, no, he's not.
thing.
He's not like Tolstoy, where there's this continual preoccupation with social norms. Not to say Tolstoy's always dealing with that, and a lot of Ivan Illich is not dealing with that. But uh,
Well, a lot of British novels are like that. Like Henry Green has all these ones, and then shows like Downton Abbey, Bridgerton. It's like it's all just it's so not always socially rigid, but definitely more rigid than what Mishima's talking about here. Um,
Yeah, uh, it's more just a personal involvement of like like what if there was a real like I love my kids and they died. How do I deal with this? And there's just so many like beautiful details that come up from that are just so
I just kept starting.
breakingly sincere. Like one of my favorites is they're visiting the future grave plot for the kids.
Yeah.
And it's this really beautiful grave area, and well, it has a slightly sarcastic remark of, how well organized is this little city of death compared to the city of the living. Um, but
Oof.
it's like it has these big green open areas, like a lot of graveyards do, and the fountain and everything, and basically her reaction is, it'll be really great that the kids will have somewhere to play, and like it doesn't that's not a logical remark in a very cold literal mechanistic sense of the word, but it's like it's really beautiful. Like yeah, it is nice they do have somewhere to play.
Yeah. And also, sorry, caught my throat. He does make a really rather universal point with death customs, which I think is true in America too, even to this day. Just on the previous thing we were talking about, he goes, such incidents, of course, go far beyond the dictates of custom, and yet at no time are people more bound to follow custom. And I think there is a certain, I just, I just think that's true for like culture. I don't know. Like I can't think of a culture where that's not true. Like it's true in our culture where, when someone dies, there's sort of like there's periods of looseness where people go, everybody grieves differently. And that kind of tries to open it up, right? So people have a variety of experience. But I still think there's certain things that if you transgress, you just can't transgress. Not
Yeah,
going to a funeral.
yeah, I mean, custom is an interesting phenomenon because a lot of it is there to give you the illusion of control. Uh,
Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with an illusion in that sense. I mean, really, I mean, a less cynical way of putting it is a reaffirmation of your control. Of, yeah, like this tragedy happened to you, like you lost someone you loved, a family member, etc. But now, and like it happened suddenly, and but now it's like, oh, but we now are all going to meet up and talk about it and give them a nice ceremony. That makes it, that reintroduces the sense that like this isn't, life isn't dominated by the randomness of accident and so on. Like there's something really valuable about tradition and custom. Neither of us need to remind ourselves that can also horribly mangle you in disgustingly terrifying ways, but there is of an actual value in there also.
I mean, yeah, I would agree. And I mean, in that way, I'm almost slightly conservative in the sense of well, a lot of the customs I like have this function that I'm not aware of in the moment, but aware of retroactively. I was like, oh, that was actually helpful. I thought it was annoying at the time, but it turns out the real was crushing and gonna kill me. And so it was nice that something came in to give me some cushioning from that shit. Um,
It's a lot of these things are,
my family, we all would cook for people. So like my parents are older, like 75. So a lot of people have died. Because they had me when they were 42. So like, okay. Um, and so, you cook for everyone and then you go and sit with them and you lift some burden, you talk with them. There's these sort of things that kind of become custom in our culture where it's like they're pretty loose, but fuck, they function. There's
yeah,
nothing wrong with them.
I think a good a metaphor that just occurs to me about custom is it's like the frame of a painting. No one gives a shit about the frame of a painting. basically. Like that's not
Yeah.
why you're coming to the gallery, but if there's ever a painting on the wall that is unframed, it's deeply disturbing and disquieting. Like you need to have that there
Hmm.
in order to like properly appreciate the work of art. And that's what a lot of sort of customs and rituals are doing. It's like it's giving you some kind of broader context that makes the processing more tolerable. And I mean, it's also positive ways custom is like wedding ceremonies and that sort of thing.
I had a very traditional wedding. You know, we were married by a philosopher, but we still had someone marry us, in the white dress and
Oh yeah,
the
yeah, and yeah, and like when I get married one day, hopefully.
and
Uh,
but I like that custom because my friends and family really like Anna and I really like Anna, and so we liked each other, but also everyone supported us as a couple. And so it was kind of like nice to have that custom there to be like, hey, thanks everyone, you also rock. You know, I, we get it. Okay, so
yeah,
moving
so back to the
back
story.
to the
Back to
story. I
the
mean, I
story, which
just
is not really about custom.
no, well,
It's only
it
a
just had this
tangential
one
issue.
quote, but it was such a great fucking quote about cuss. It's just like one little tiny thing, but I realized rereading it, I was like, yeah, that was really good writing.
Yeah, it's also one thing I want to notice about Mishima here, which I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I like it, but I don't know what to make of it. Is he also has this slightly morbid, polite and sincere, and not mocking exactly, but like morbid sense of humor at moments.
Yeah,
Uh, One of the two moments that come to mind are, well, I think basically right after well, they're talking about like just all of the ceremony and like uh, custom and all that. It's just mentioned like the kid, the surviving child, felt like it was a series of festival days. You know,
yeah,
just with all of the gifts and I guess and the way people are coming over and just all of that. And it's just like there's something it's funny. It's a funny remark, but it's also like belying. It's like a contrast to the tragedy of like, yeah, the kid is sort of enjoying it, and it's sort of underlining just how weird and impersonal and odd the custom is. Another one that stood out to me was this one really was a surprise was it was describing the family's financial situation, how he was a successful businessman, the father, with good English, and also he had a little bit of extra support from some kind of surreptitious embezzlement. Uh, and then it just makes the comment: there was no need to cut down the family by three. There was no pressing need to do. Oh, I lost you. Yeah. So what do you think of those kinds of remarks he makes, Chris?
I think that it shows that he has a real appreciation for other people's psyches in a very specific way. Like kids have their own reality. We know this, but sometimes bad writing, and I love this writer. I think she's phenomenal. But Allie Smith sometimes has her 12-year-old characters be like, what's great about the ontology of existence is, and you're like, 12-year-old would never say this shit ever. No 12-year-old speaks this way. And it becomes very odd. And it's a really big problem. Lots of writers have this issue of not being able to get into the brain of others. Strangely, a fundamental requirement of fiction. Um, I think that Mishima is able to do it. And so it just strikes me as psychologically true. I remember family functions, funerals, parties, and whatever is going on with the function is almost irrelevant because we're just going to go play.
Mhm.
I don't know if your family's had a lot of
I've
funerals
I've
or
attended one kind of funeral and no weddings in my life.
in fact, okay, it's like when my grandpa died, I was like 12, right? And it was very sad and we were crying. And like, but I remember grieving after, like on my own, like, oh, this is sad. At the time, I remember being like kind of mad that we had to like stop life, like that I had to like fly to Arizona and kind of
mhm.
like he was on his deathbed and he did this really really kind gesture where we wheeled in the piano on his deathbed and he listened to my piano recital. And I think my thought at the time was something like, oh, but I've already heard that piece. Because it's like I played it. I don't want to hear it again. So but later on it has really meaningful. It's very lovely that we did that. But I think that everything he writes about the kids makes total sense. It's just
Yeah, the kid one, like that one fits. It's also but like just that little comment about there was no pressing need to cut down the family by three.
I think I think there's a couple interpretations. I actually think that's a really complicated sentence. Maybe one of the more complicated ones in the whole story, but I don't know if I want to destroy it. You know what I mean? It's another one of those sentences where it's kind of lovely on its own. So I think that
Go for it.
I'm gonna do it on this one because it's kind of fun. I feel that that sentence conveys a lot, but I need to have this figure of like the foil where you're bouncing off your ideas to a person who's not real. Like when you have thoughts in your head and you have like this
Yeah,
other person.
yeah.
So I feel like at some point he felt guilty, like, oh man, it'd be easier to feed this many people if we just had a smaller family. And then that could either be true or that doesn't have to be true at all. What could be true is that someone else in a similar position would have had that thought. And he's saying, no, we don't need to have that thought.
Yeah, I okay. I think you're really nailing what that's doing there.
It has to involve two imaginary people
Yeah,
talking.
I think I don't exactly agree with the formulation, but like the essence of it is there.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
nailed
Make
the
it more
essence,
specific. Yeah, fix it.
and that's basically at least what I think is going on is we're now meeting the father. The father is reacting to it in this very like cold, impersonal kind of way.
Yeah.
This tragedy and this kind of calculation is just so cold and impersonal. Like there's a truth to it, but can we not say this rather impolite fact right now? It's not the time.
Mm.
So I feel it like gets the reader into that mindset of like being deeply dissociated from the events, like saying something very sort of crass and materialistic in the midst, in the moment of delivery of the tragedy, more or less.
And I think there's also it hooks up in a more topical sense than the deep back and forth between imaginary people I was talking about. Like in a more topical sense, unnecessary. Just the idea that something doesn't have to be like instead of it being this traumatic, real, horrifying, unfathomable thing, the father's defense is sometimes like, wow, that's kind of unnecessary.
Yeah, no, I think that's yeah, no, that's right. That's right. Let's see, there was some other aspect of this that just occurred to me. Oh yeah, yeah, that it certainly gets you into the mindset of him, as you're saying. And it's also, I think this is a small element in it. It's just another little way which this whole tragedy is just fucking stupid. Like, why existence? Why did this happen? This
Yeah,
means nothing.
exactly.
It's like we weren't even having problems financially. Like, we could have supported, the kids and the aunt, like, just fine.
Yeah, and there's a subtle movement where like the parents get farther apart, get closer and farther apart. But I like that Mishima makes it not super overpowering of a message, like, oh, but it brought them together. It's like, no, they were married at the beginning. Like, yeah, it might have changed on a micro level, but it's not the message of the story that the children died brought the parents more together. That's not the meaning. Um, it might be a tiny facet of it, but I think that like it really has to be unnecessary. Like it has to be just like totally a cataclysm, like not
Yeah,
you
no,
know,
and
no.
one of the things which is again just a brilliant like little paragraph he has. It's like it was like they were living a moral, but an utterly trivial and irrelevant one. Of you always have to watch kids when they're in the water. You never know when they can drown. this is not a moral that changes your life in any sense. It's like, okay, like some people talk about how like, yeah, I had cancer and like I just grew so much as a human being and I got my priorities straight and I appreciated what was beautiful about life, and getting cancer was the best thing that ever happened. You know, you have that, and I believe that a lot of people are like that, and like they really do process it that way. It would be great if they could have gotten that through some other means, but that's great that they got that. They really learned something valuable about life through this terrible tragedy that they had to go through.
And then there's other people where it's like, what the fuck, man?
Basically, it's like you learned, yeah,
Why
you
do you
know,
do that?
you shouldn't text and drive. You really shouldn't like. What would be another one? Just you should wear your seat belts always, even when it's like in a parking lot. It's like that's the level of trivial elementary school safety lesson that you're getting here, and it's so fucking stupid that
Right,
it's,
because she has a heart attack. It's like
yeah, yeah.
it's doubly removed from blame.
Yeah, so
You
it's
know,
like, yeah, yeah, even that level, it's like, yeah, it's not even a lesson that they had to learn. It's like, okay, actually, the sort of the, I mean, you could sort of maybe say, like, it doesn't matter. Uh,
right. I
but it,
think Mishima is trying to leave a little wiggle room, but I think that also it's on the level of a meteor. It's like, okay, what do I what do I do with that?
yeah,
You know,
and in terms of the idea of like, oh, like we got stronger than ever through this, it's like, no, that's not the impression that's given. The impression is no, we got back together and the family is moving forward, but it's basically like, no, there are the old memories and there are the new memories.
isn't survival good enough? I mean, I feel like one of Mishima's messages is survival on that. Like it's like I don't need a meaning actually. I don't know if he's giving us one other than just like they got through it. And this is the process. But I think that if there is, it's kind of like, you know, they did it. They did survive.
Yeah, it's not. This is not a story where you exactly get a moral of, oh, this is the way I should act, because
No.
neither of them are doing anything. Okay, there's little things that come up of like, okay, that's good that the wife is maybe finding something to be busy with herself, although that's also a little bit odd. Probably the best thing was like when she's like having the baby and like she's pregnant and she realizes, no, I want to like take control of myself and I don't want to
Yeah.
be like grieving all of the time. I want to move on, like, but that isn't presented exactly as like, oh, well, this is the model. It's like no, that's just a good healthy thing she's doing for herself.
Yeah, and that also aids in the general feeling of hope at the end without a message of hope. I feel like there's a difference there. It's like feeling of hope does not mean message of hope. Like you get the feeling that it's almost arbitrary, that like, yeah, they did this and it's kind of a nice feeling at the end, but a retelling of this could end with them in divorce. It often happens when the kids dies that the parents get divorced. It's sad, but you know, and I think that sort of I think that gives the characters a sense of freedom. You know, if they're confined to a sort of message, then they're required to act in certain ways.
Okay, there's a lot of things to say about that. Okay, one part of it that I would just say that what Mishima is doing, he doesn't have a message in the sense of go do X
No.
or you should aspire to be like Y. It's basically just, yeah, this is what life is like. This is what this kind of incident is like. You go through this range of emotions, and this is representative of human existence in this particular way. It's sad, it's tragic, but there's something beautiful and good in it too, and sincere
That's
and
funny.
tender.
My buddy and I read Against Interpretation, and
Yeah, yeah,
we
that's a
love
good.
that essay, but like and hate it too. We argue in love and hate, but one of the funny things is like so the interpretation you just offered, right? Personal fact based on the thing. Preston and I were talking about like for a lot of people who don't like know a lot of art, that wouldn't be good enough, right? You know, like no, but what's the message? And it's like, oh, I don't we don't do that. You know, like what's the
Yeah,
moral? It's like it kind of has this sort of
Now
soft.
there's now there's nothing wrong with some things that like have a very clear moral, like the plays of
Oh,
it like usually
tons of
have.
19th century literature is edifying,
Yeah,
right?
and that's great. That's great for them, but it's not the only kind of literature. Like, and really, like that's just a tool.
But it's
Like,
not the essence of literature for
yeah,
me.
like
For me,
the essence of literature is what is it like to be alive? What is it like to be a human being? And having like some theme that you're elaborating on, like that's nice, that's great, but that's just a tool for that end.
mm.
The moral is just one particular device, like characterization or plot, to convey the feeling of human existence.
So I think this would be a good one to show people who are getting into literature, right? Because like it's like you don't I didn't feel the desire to reach for like a edifying principle. Same thing with a simple heart.
Yeah.
And in a simple heart, it would be sort of noxious to do so. Actually,
Yeah,
it's
like
like,
the moral
you
of
know,
the simple heart is life just kind of beats the shit out of you.
right?
And it's really sad and beautiful, and I'm about to cry thinking about the ending, but it's like no, like this is not the kind of world where you do things.
Right, and all the ways of interpreting literature in the different lenses, I think that like where I agree with Susan Sontag and where I I go is when it we can do whatever we want, obviously, with any lens, but we can also undermine what's actually happening in the text.
Yeah,
And that's
my,
where we have our problem.
my basic reading of the Sontag is she has the dichotomy of either you're going to over intellectualize things with these grotesque, irrelevant Freudian or Marxist or Christian or objectivist readings of it. Objectivist, I want to say sort of pseudo objectivist, but um, I just I just want to be clear. Just like sometimes I've seen objectivists, like, oh, this means this, and it's like you're not reading the thing, you fuck.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I mean, it's
uh,
it's any whatever lens you choose,
and
you're doing the
so
thing.
that's like one side of it, and then the other side of it for her is like you just basically let the work of art rape you. You just let it like happen at you. You experience it um, in this kind of direct, seeming like primal way. And I'm going to say, like, if you had to choose to one of side of the dichotomy, that's the better one to choose because it's possible for you to get something out of the work of art if you do that.
Yeah, it's like doing forms analysis in music. Like I remember we do these brilliant, like deep looks at Bach, and then at the tail end, like, well, how'd you like the piece? Because you're looking at the construction of it, right?
Yeah.
But like I always in my teaching reversed that. Like, okay, let's talk about the impact, let's talk about the essence and that feeling sense, and then we can do our formal analysis and kind of ruin
And,
it.
and and that's the way it should be, is in you can do analysis in a way that's actually
Yeah.
valuable, that
Well, I also
actually
think
contributes to understanding that emotional primal response and actually often makes possible that response at certain times.
well, it's the difference between Kafka versus like Pynchon. Like Kafka, to do anything like this, he just would cry. Like Preston and I were talking about how Susan Sontag works best with Kafka, where any of those she mentions all those interpretive lenses on Kafka, and I cringed at each of them because it's like stop hurting Kafka. Whereas someone else that's kind of like, well, they're kind of doing it, so let's do
Yeah,
it.
well, basically, like I mean, I'd cringe at any great writer having that done too, and I just look at impatience when it's done at a non-great writer. Um, it's like,
But
yeah, I mean, okay, like Pynchon,
yeah,
I don't have that I have an opinion of, so go to town, buddy.
go to town. Actually, I weirdly might agree. But I think another thing that the Susan Sontag, this is something where we're both out of the academy. I think that essay, ooh, Big Thunder. I think that essay means a lot more to me now leaving the academy because I didn't catch this the first time I read it, but she's very mad at her colleagues. Like it's like you go to one camp and it's like, no, we're the deconstructionists. This is the way to do it. And you go to another, it's like, no, we're the Marxists. It's like, no, we're the phenomenologists. No, we're the, you
Yeah,
know, and everyone's just arguing and no one's interpreting the work. Everyone's just kind of
it's a it's
arguing
a
for their
it's
lens.
a complicated form of non-engagement, and that sort of thing does, like, at certain times it will irritate me to the inexpressibly.
Well, isn't our solution out of it to just base our interpretation on the on what the words on the page?
Yeah, no,
Because the words are complicated enough. I mean, there's room for.
the thing is like that's we should get back to the story eventually,
Sorry, it was yeah.
but
We
I
got a
wanted
little.
I wanted to say this one thing is,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
there's a reason why like you have people blind to that, and like, okay, like just read what's on the page. It's like, well, no, you have to have a certain image of what human beings and human emotions are like. You have a certain theory of how that works, and if you're a Marxist, like, you have this theory of like, oh yeah, it's all related to the means of production, and if you're a Freudian, it's like, oh yeah, it's this weird psychosexual game of tango. It's like this is not. Um, there's a reason why they would do it that way, and you have to, like, in order to defend a, what we might say, a more common sense reading of these things, you have to do work of like, well, what are human beings like? What are human emotions like?
I
So
think
there's like a context for like why you have to, there's an argument you have to propose to defend that.
I think that this definitely goes with this text would be like crimes against literature to do a Marxist interpretation of.
Yeah,
Because
that
you would do it with like, oh well, they're in the bourgeoisie, the lower classes. They don't get the time to grieve like the middle class do. I mean, look, there's all this time. They're so privileged. Why are we focused on these bourgeoisie privileged people and their intellectual grief?
you fill me with such strong feelings of dispassionate murder.
I know. It was like I saw
I
your face go into
I
stab mode.
just, actually, oh, I think that's the first time in my life where I've ever felt something was beneath contempt on a literal level. Like, usually when you say beneath contempt, it's like, no, you just are experiencing contempt. That's all it is. Literally with this, it's like, I don't want to get the emotional energy up to like respond to that perspective.
Out there. Another thing is when we were interpreting Mishima, we have a great time reading it, and we've referenced numerous passages, from the text. I think I think one thing that for undergrads, I know you didn't do an arts degree, but I'm sure there's some equivalent in the math world actually, is like they're easier. It's easy to go to Marxism. It's easy to go to Freud. Like it gives you a response so you don't have to think for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you could say with math, what can, now this isn't as straightforward and obvious per se, but one thing that can happen is you're not actually engaging with what the mathematics is saying. You've turned it into a just a purely formal arbitrary game. All of the symbols in front of you, you don't have any actual like images, clear concrete, a feeling of how the various theorems relate in the broader system. Like, you've got this sort of caricature of mathematical life as just this wall of symbols or platonic uh, forms or something like that. Like that can also happen, but it's and you can, so like there is something, there is actually some kind of connection. It's very 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 different than whatever the fuck is happening in the humanities. Um,
We have fun in the humanities.
and I want to say, like, even like that distorted way, like there's still some kind of foundation to it. There is a reality testing going on there.
Well, what's hard in the humanities is you have the reality testing not of if the theory's true, but the knowledge of the theories themselves. And that produces a lot of labor to actually be well-rounded. Like, you don't have to believe Marxism is right. You can be like, this is totally wrong. However, there's still going to be a pressure to understand what it is. And that's a fact. You know, what phenomenology is, what Freudianism or psychoanalysis is. And so it's almost an extra layer of difficulty because you have reality testing on top of the facts, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an extra layer. But in any sense, I actually don't know if I have any more to say about Yukio Mishima. I mean, I really like it though. I think he's teaching me, you know, how to write in a lot of ways. Like there's certain writers when I read them, it's like, oh wow, you can get there. Wow, you go over here. Oh, I didn't know. It's this feeling like that, like, oh yeah, I did experience it that way, but I didn't have the words. And that's
Yeah.
pretty brilliant.
No, I mean he's a remarkable, remarkable writer. This man. I'm really glad that you introduced me to him, Chris. It was just a. It's really great to just read something just burningly sincere like this.
Yeah. And it's wild because in the literature he's burningly sincere, and then in real life he's burningly sincerely crazy.
Yeah, that
It works. I don't know. I don't know. There's
I,
something
I
about
I
him.
don't understand how human beings work.
No.
I understand lots of aspects and the certain kinds of people I sort of see how they fit together, but the mystery of how you can be like incredibly sensitive and real in this one area of your life and well a fascist after when there's some kind of
In the
understanding
fascist in the
of what the
70s.
Japanese have done. It's like
Huh?
beforehand, I don't know what the picture was like beforehand, but afterwards, like you know about the rape of Nanking, buddy. That
Well,
was
he
not
said,
good.
you have to think of a very intimate picture with him, not about military events, not about those type of facts. I think the best quote to get into Mishima's head about this is like he said at the end of World War II, we have to preserve Japanese irrationality if we want our culture to have any meaning on the world stage, which kills me. I said that a little wrong, but it's based, that's the essence of it.
Yeah,
It's a very counterintuitive way of thinking about things.
it's interesting. Well, this is going to other conversations I've been having, but it's like I hear those words and my basic reaction is I don't know what you mean. I need like a whole world of explanation of like, well, what's your idea of what reason is? What do you actually value about Japanese culture? What do you view as like the vision of the future that this is leading to? And like
And it's weird
it's
because like in this story, I felt it was a very basic universal story. Like there wasn't a lot in here that we weren't able to get on culturally. So it's interesting how, and also that idea of irrationality, I felt this was a exceedingly rational story.
it's
Right? Like everything fit in rational. It's not
so
like there's suddenly any vampires or something. I don't know. But that's not what he means. And so it's interesting. What he meant was that he felt that the West, with all of its technology, I mean, again, this is wrong, but I'm just going to get into the narrative, is sort of the land of orderliness. Like we were imposing order and destroying culture. And
and and
I
that's
don't
again
know. I don't
something
know. It
where
just
it's
doesn't
like
seem.
I can the thing is like then it's this whole weird like bizarre mixture of things of well what's your exact vision of these like different things that go on there and like what are like the major concretes in your mind and it's like I can see someone holding that view in a really grotesquely vicious way and
Yeah.
I can see someone holding that view in a way that's maybe not completely honest but like a certain sincere core.
Well, it's the difference between Hitler saying something and a Navajo saying something. Like
Yeah.
if a Navajo tribe member says, I want to preserve aspects of our culture, it's like, well, fuck yeah. I mean, Yeah, like
Like
just but like
there's
if
a conversation to be had.
Hitler
Yeah,
does it,
well,
yeah.
like,
So it's like I don't, and it's like it is. I think where it's bad faith is like it's like Mishima. It's like I know the country was sort of destroyed, but there's so much great stuff around you. But again, we're different. I'm a cosmopolitan bourgeoisie loser in that way to him. Like I got like no honesty in me, I'm like, I don't know, just kind of happy being that. So I don't know. It's confronted with Yukio Mishima's honesty is a little traumatic though, because he's in a world of a lot of kind of cynicism. It's like this is not a cynical man.
no, he really no. I mean, this story is there's like touches there. Some like touches in there. He doesn't have a view of human beings as being like really wonderful and good things. But he's got a but there is like tenderness, open-heartedness. These are things in his universe. He's not someone like my go-to writer for this sort of thing is like Guy de Maupassant, where it's like he's just so cynical, and even then he has his own moments of tenderness, but it's so but like those are also marred by a kind of irony too.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, I think that like the alienated modernist position has some of the opposite of Mishima. Like, I think some of the De Benedetto pretty far from, if
well,
there was a continent, it would be a different
I mean,
view
De
of it.
Benedetto, it's so hard to understand these things and about human life. De Benedetto is another kind of example where yeah, I mean it's radically inhuman, but there's also something sincere and almost heartfelt. And I don't want to think about De Benedetto right now. I'm going through
As,
stuff, and this
as
is
hard,
that's not a good universe for me.
they're coming out with a new translation of the last of his novels. I will not get it for you because it sounds like that is not the writer you are in the mood for.
I very much admire De Benedetto, but my life is already feeling radically fragmented and impersonal enough as it is.
Oh,
So
I'll give you
that's
something. I'll
yeah.
give you. I won't give you brainworms, but I think that yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I have to say on Death in Midsummer. Um, I do think he's a little anachronistic time-wise, but I don't have enough knowledge to back up my sort of just intuition on this. I do feel that he's like the last great 19th century writer. Like I do think that him reading Kafka or De Benedetto or Borges, he would just be like, "The fuck are you people doing?" I don't know. Like it would be really.
Yeah, I don't know, and it's I don't know if I'd go that far with it. Like there is, I mean he fits. Yeah, he's less modern than we might say like Hemingway is. But let's just who cares what time he's from? He's a
There's,
timeless writer.
there's room for greatness. Yeah, you know what? That's the answer to my problem. Is it's not a problem. Great writing exists.
Yeah, let's just be very thankful he wrote the things he wrote. All right, so this has been great, Chris. Thanks again for this one. Next time we're doing "Asleep in the Sun" by how do you pronounce his name again? Alfredo Boyce Cazares.
Calling
Anyway,
him Mr. Boy. I don't know. I don't know how to
I
pronounce his
don't
name.
know. I don't know how
Oh,
to
I
say
don't.
Spanish. Um,
Really.
okay, so all right, great. Another language we can just fucking slaughter. All right.
We're just like doing translations this whole time.
Yeah, yeah. It's just like
Well, there's a whole world of people out there all writing great shit. So, all right. Thanks, Ray.
yeah, it was great, Chris. Bye.